And for more now on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I want to bring in Anders Fogh Rasmussen. He is the founder and chairman of Rasmussen Global. Before that, he served as NATO Secretary General and also as the Prime Minister of Denmark. We've reached him in Copenhagen. Mr. Rasmussen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So given the critical nature NATO has played in discussions between Russian and Ukrainian officials to lead to a peace deal of sorts, has perhaps the expansion of NATO eastward in some ways brought us to this point of Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
No, not at all. That's a false narrative provided by Putin and Russia. We enlarged NATO. We enlarged the European Union at the right moment. Think about what would have happened if we didn't enlarge NATO and European Union back in 2004. Then the Baltic states and other Eastern European countries would have been subject to Russian aggression. But thanks to their membership of NATO and the European Union, they are now well protected.
You recently wrote that Vladimir Putin's dream of quick and painless regime change in Ukraine is turning into a nightmare in the face of stiff resistance. Wondering whether or not you believe that perhaps the aid that NATO leaders are providing to Ukraine is enough, and whether or not they do need to act more than they are so far.
We can do more. Firstly, we can step up the delivery of sophisticated weapons to the Ukrainians, drones, anti-aircraft, anti-tank missiles, and other equipment. So we can do much more when it comes to helping the brave Ukrainians militarily. But furthermore, I would suggest that the European Union stop all import of oil and gas from Russia. That would bring the Russian economy to its knees. It will stop financing the war in Ukraine. Of course, it will come at a price. It will be a challenge for Europe, but I think that price is small compared to the suffering of the Ukrainian people, and it's tiny compared to the loss of freedom that would be the consequences of not acting now.
And certainly we have seen European leaders, many of them, commit towards that goal in the future of stopping their dependence on Russian oil. I wanted to also ask you, we know that there is a summit, a NATO summit of the leaders that will be taking place next week. If you were there, what would the discussions be like? What do you anticipate the discussions will be like?
First of all, my recommendation would be to stop all talk about excluding any kind of action. I think Western leaders have been much too eager to exclude this or that reaction to Putin's aggression. I think we should keep all options on the table. We should keep Putin in uncertainty about how we will act if he accelerates the war. And next, I would encourage all allies to deliver many more weapons to the Ukrainians. That's what they need now, weapons to fight the aggressor.
When you say do not exclude any actions, what about troops on the ground?
I don't think time is ripe for troops on the ground. But it may well be in the future that Putin crosses some red lines, that he uses weapons that are prohibited, or continues his war crimes in Ukraine. So why should we self-restrict and not keep all options on the table to counter that kind of acceleration? I have no intention to deploy troops on the ground. I have no intention to establish a no-fly zone. I have no intention to open a war between NATO and Russia. But I think the best tool to prevent war is to keep Putin in uncertainty about our intentions.
Now, I do want to also ask about how this may be perceived. Of course, we've seen global condemnation for the most part for Russia's actions. You did support the Iraq War in 2003 when you were Prime Minister of Denmark. How does Russia's invasion of Ukraine compare and contrast, especially given the fact that we know that the pretense for the invasion, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, was based on false intelligence when it came to weapons of mass destruction?
Well, Denmark supported that operation because of Iraq's non-compliance with a number of UN resolutions adopted by the United Nations. That's why we supported the operation. And the clear difference is that Putin has now attacked a neighboring country, a peaceful democracy. Is for the first time since the Second World War, a European country tries to grab land by force from a neighboring country. Of course, that's unacceptable. It's a violation of international law, and the way the war is conducted is war crime.
And we've heard the U.S. president use that term to refer to Vladimir Putin. You know, back earlier in the year, in January, I believe you said that Vladimir Putin was bluffing. There was a belief that he would not go to this extent. What do you make of the actions now? Did you at any point think that it would go this far?
No. Honestly speaking, I didn't expect to experience anything like this in my lifetime. But I have to realize we underestimated Putin's determination to realize the idea by which he is obsessed, namely to restore the greatness of the former Soviet Union. He wants to establish a zone of a sphere of Russian domination in the territory covered by the former Soviet Union. We underestimated his desire to achieve that goal, and we underestimated the brutality he is willing to execute in achieving that goal.
When we talk about the brutality, certainly the news that we're learning today of the attacks in Mariupol, where children was indicated outside the target of an attack. We're seeing denials from Russia that they carried out such attacks or that civilians are being targeted, more than 100 children killed. So what then is the red line? We've heard this question a lot. What then is the red line for the alliance, for NATO, to do even more than they are doing to actually get involved?
Yeah, but it's heartbreaking images we are watching from Ukraine, and I'm angry and devastated about the whole invasion. It's incredible. So I think at the end of the day, we shouldn't be clear in the definition of red lines, because when you define a clear red line, then your adversary is tempted to test it, to test our resolve. I think it's a much better strategy to keep our adversary, in this case Putin, in uncertainty about our intentions. But clearly, if he uses, for instance, chemical weapons or continues his violation of international law, war crimes, etc., that's part of my definition of a red line. And that's why I wouldn't exclude any kind of action in advance.
And very finally, Mr. Rasmussen, I do want to ask you how you believe this all ends. We know that we have seen many rounds of talks between officials from Ukraine, from Russia, a lot of critical points, goals that each side would like to achieve. Where do you think this ends? How much longer does it carry on for?
I think we could be in this for a very long haul. Of course, I appreciate the peace talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians, but I understand very well that the Ukrainians are very suspicious about it because it could be a trap from the Russian side to declare a ceasefire and then regroup and attack Ukraine once again. So I understand very well that the Ukrainian side is very, very careful. But if it leads to a ceasefire, if it leads to withdrawal of Russian troops, one way or the other, of course, I would appreciate that.